Well, I'm delighted to have Bonnie with us this morning. I know people have done the research, they've read all the wonderful CVs that have been sent out, but there are probably three things that I really appreciate about Bonnie and in meeting her in person and being inspired and then being on Zoom. One is her incredible experience of religious life in leadership and in many other contexts, her expertise in canon law and the way in which she has developed a whole range of congregations that she's supporting in helping them discern and explore new ways of governance and what that could look like in the myriad of situations in consecrated life across our globe. But also, we share a very good friend. Many of us were formed in governance in the, dare I say, for some of us, the 80s and 90s and 2000s, around either listening to Frank Morrissey in person, reading his material, or the videos, the links, and being inspired. And one of Frank's lasting gifts to the church was taking his quiet, shy, retiring friend Bonnie and convincing her that canon law was her next vocation. And so Frank continues to influence governance in Australia in a myriad of ways, but with the new evolving legacy, Bonnie, that you bring to us. So we look forward to engaging with you, of listening to you, and most importantly, I hope the others receive what I did, which was an excitement about consecrated life in its current context. Bonnie, at Emerging Futures, we just always begin with a short acknowledgement of country and prayer. And so Judy, who you have met, Judy Lawson, a Dominican sister who you've met on Zoom in another part of your life, is going to lead us in a reflection to start with.
Thank you. We begin with the acknowledgement of country, as always. We acknowledge the traditional owners and occupiers of the lands where we are now gathered. We acknowledge the stories of this land. We acknowledge the peoples of this land. We acknowledge the yarning of this land. We acknowledge the languages of this land. We acknowledge that this land and her peoples need healing, as do we. May we be inspired by truth tellers, justice seekers, and peacemakers in every age. Turn our inaction into action for their voices to be heard, their dreams to be fulfilled. And we pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And we pause now for a short reflective prayer, asking the presence of God with us at this time. You beckon the whole universe into life, O God. You who are the source of all that is, our Creator. You beckon us to follow you on your costly journey, O God. You who are the Christ, the way, our truth, our life. You beckon us still into new birthings, O God. You who are Holy Spirit, our nurturer, our lover, our friend. Do not stop calling to us, God of our pilgrim journey. Beckon us into your brave conversations and open our hearts to the newness of each other, O God. Forgive our lack of courage and hope. Thank you for our present with its small callings, its stirrings in our souls, its flashes of truth, and its soundings towards love. Thank you for our future. Before we know it, before we see it, before we enter it, in faith, we invite you to beckon us on, O God, that we may be your people and you may be our God. We commit ourselves to you as we enter this time and space and our brave conversations together. We will risk hearing each other, trust ourselves to each other in faith, and await the presence of your Spirit among us, O God. Amen.
I now invite Bonnie to open up our conversation today. And Bonnie, you have screen sharing ability, or whether you just like to speak to us at the beginning. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Linda. I remember very well our luncheon meeting when we were at LCWR. Excuse me. And when I read your email and I read all the documentations you sent me from your Emerging Futures Collaborative, I remember that sense of excitement about the possibilities of newness for consecrated life that I still had at that time. And you know how it goes. Sometimes the days are such that you have that same level of enthusiasm and excitement, and it grows, and the Spirit gives it to you. And at other times, circumstances happen that can tend to, if not thwart, then certainly uh, dull the enthusiasm of the moment. And I keep thinking about Father Frank and Father Frank's caution to me. He said, you know, Bonnie, trying to change the Vatican is like trying to turn the Queen Mary on a dime. It doesn't happen quickly. And he has proven to be so correct. And I have thought of him often. By the way, it was his birthday on the 13th of February. And I remember him, as Linda has suggested, with gratitude. I would never have wanted to study canon law. And when Frank had suggested it to me, I said, Frank, I know where we get our canonical advice. It's called 1-800-CALL-FRANK. And rather than study canon law, I would rather have needles in my eyes. So Frank said, well, you know, maybe you need to pray about this a little bit. And look what happened, eh? Hey, Frank, you won yet again. I came out of my actually 3 terms on leadership, once as a counselor and 2 terms as general superior. And he said, you know, when that's over, come and study canon law. And I thought my salvation would be that my background degrees were in human and organizational development. And they were looking for theology, which I had none of. So I thought, well, that's good. They won't accept me. Well, they did. So here I am, having been exposed to the law as an opportunity to receive the kiss of the divine. And that's what I keep reminding myself of as I move forward in this and I experience some of the fears and the uncertainties that I sense at the Vatican and their nominal support for an evolving or emerging future, their call to synodality. But when the rubber hits the road, there's significant fear that sometimes works in opposition to the desire. But my desire tonight, excuse me, or it should be in morning for you, my desire today is to share with you what I believe is really God's call. Because it doesn't happen overnight doesn't make it not God's call. And so I believe that we have almost this perfect storm of the realities of consecrated life in the world, in the English-speaking developed world primarily, the realities of the call to synodality. And this dear Pope who's suffering from bilateral pneumonia, who I pray will recover. Every time I hear of his declining health, I have this terrible sense of foreboding, recognizing that God's Spirit is bigger than any one of us. And we just have to keep our eye on the prize, which is the call of God as consecrated persons in the church to continue Jesus's mission. So with that, I will share my screen. Pardon me. Okay. Now let me just minimize you folks. Now, I won't be able to see you because I've minimized your screens. So if you have an interjection or a question, I would ask you to please go ahead and interject because you don't want to lose the question or lose the thought. So I read all of your documentations, and we had interacted, Sharon and Linda and I previously, about the Emerging Futures Collaborative, and I had known of your application to Rome through CRA, which, to tell you the truth, I thought was very good. However, their concern was the mission and the mandate of CRA, etc. But we have to help the Holy See think life in a different way. So what I'd like to do is certainly talk a bit about what you folks have done, but you asked me to review with you the global perspective on religious life at this time in our history. And what you said in the email, Linda, was what makes this the most exciting time for consecrated life. And the night that I did this slide, I also put the parentheses in that said, really? I had received a letter from the Vatican about another situation in which something, a model that I felt was quite creative and could be used ad experimentum. The response was less than enthusiastic from the Holy See. And at moments like that, I said to one of the sisters from another community, I said, sometimes I'd like to just put my head in a pail of sand because I feel like I'm going no place. I don't know if you've ever tried to get up a hill of sand where you lose your footing constantly. And I think that's the purpose of our coming together tonight. It's to rekindle that fire of the call, which is beyond any one of us, beyond any of our congregations as we move forward. And it's the call of the divine to live and to be the living personification of God's embrace of the world, God's love for the world, and God's continued ministry in the world through consecrated persons. So I'll go over a bit of the global perspective, which you all know, that nothing in what I'm going to say to you will be a surprise. What I hope you will walk away with, excuse me, is a desire to continue to find new ways of moving forward. I did have some questions for you in relation to your anticipated structures and whatnot, and I'd love to hear some of your experiences with the Holy See. So, I wanted to talk to you a bit about some meetings we had with Dickelcell in December of 2022 and March of 2023. December of 22 was the first experience that I had of going to the Vatican and presenting on behalf of Canada the realities of consecrated life in our country. And as happens, which normally happens, we think our experience in our little corner of the world is a replication of what's happening everywhere. Well, lo and behold, when we got there, we found out that indeed it was. I was surprised. I thought the reality of consecrated life in Canada and our experience of diminishment was simply our experience, and that this was not the experience of other places in the developed world. Excuse me. And when we got there, what we heard country after country after country, and Australia was there, country after country, we heard the same demographics. We heard the same, not lack of spirit, but almost a desire for a shared collaboration to find and discern solutions together. And we also heard the concerns of the Holy See of what will we do here? What is this meant to do for us? So that was in December of 22. And I suppose, when things are looking bad, misery kind of likes company. So finding that there are other groups that are experiencing the same realities, the question became for me at that meeting, not so much that we were sharing a reality that seemed to identify the completion of consecrated life, but perhaps the completion of consecrated life as we have known it. Because nothing in creation ever dies. It's always in a place of transformation and transition. So I left that meeting in December at the Vatican recognizing, and then they called another meeting in March. And if you can believe it, in March of 23, the time for the meeting was just before Holy Week. And I thought, like, everyone has so much time to come back to the Vatican. Are you aware that it's Holy Week? And indeed they were. But the theme for the meetings in March were more focused, and they were on discernment and accompaniment. And again, let me just temper this by saying the goals of the Holy See are laudable and good, and I think contain the essence of God's call to us. Whether or not the humans engaged in this whole process of goal realization are able to continue a journey in faith that says we can try things a new way, that is something that is growing and continues to need to be massaged. So I keep reminding myself not to be critical, but to continue to invite and to find ways of engaging. So in December, we had the English speaking countries, developed countries. When we came back in March, what we had was many different countries. So we ended up having 18 different countries with simultaneous translation and 8 interpreters who were engaged. And lo and behold, we were hearing a repetitive story. The difference between the December meeting with the Holy See and March was they began to filter and to focus discernment, identifying goals. It was more than just information sharing. It was more than a shared discernment experience. What they did was identify goals. And the first goal they identified was deepening the conversation. And we were located at Casa La Salle in Rome. And the goal of the dicastery really was to continue and deepen our conversation regarding the future of consecrated life. Those conversations we began in December. So how would we be able to continue this? And it was really a heartening and a heartwarming experience. Not because Misery Life's company, because you could feel the evolution of something new. My guess is that you have felt that yourselves in your emerging futures group, the beginning of something new being born. The second goal was to find the light of the Holy Spirit. And the Cardinal noted that Pope Francis holds the gift of consecrated life close to his heart and has encouraged Dickelcell to assist religious institutes to discover the light of the Holy Spirit in the journey we now find ourselves on. So this isn't about denying reality or wearing rose-colored glasses to make things look good that really look quite bad from a purely logistical point of view. Instead, the Holy Father focuses on God's continued call and God's continued promise of faithfulness, and that the future of consecrated life is not dependent on any one of us, but on all of us as we move forward. The third goal was accompaniment and this whole concept of synodality. Remember, this was in March of 23, and that would have been before the first sessions on the synod and synodality that would have occurred in the fall of 23. Excuse me. So the Pope's desire really was for accompaniment. When you begin to see all of this in context, you can see a growing picture of interrelatedness, of shared support, of collaboration that helps us to move to a new place. As they noted at the session in March, this journey will require that Dickelcell and religious institutes throughout the world walk synodally, accompanying each other on the journey to new ways of being consecrated persons in our church and in our world. And as noted at Vatican II, consecrated life is a great gift in the life of the church, and that's in Perfecta Caritatis, Article 1. And our question becomes, how can we continue to support and find new expressions of consecrated life, of this gift into the future? And we are being invited to discern how God's Spirit is leading us into a future that is full of hope. And it really is about a shared call. When we were at the dicastery, Archbishop Carballo and also Cardinal de Avis Braz, the prefect at that time, noted that the call of the dicastery at this time is to discern new ways of accompanying religious institutes as they discern a future full of hope. And like Jesus, who met the disciples on the road to Emmaus, we are called to walk with each other and hear the story of our lives. Because what we found in both December's meeting at the Vatican in 22 and the March 23 meeting, it's our shared stories and our shared hearts that the Spirit will open new ways. Okay, I've got an echo of my voice, so someone's got something playing in the background. That the Spirit will open new ways of discerning where and how God is leading us into the future. So again, I say this so that we can root ourselves in the reality that the Holy See was expressing. And we all belong to congregations in which we come from our chapters with the best of hopes and the best of ideals and desires to move forward in new ways. And we also know that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, that there will be different forces that will mitigate against the goal and the desire for synodality, for a sense of a continuation of God's Spirit helping us to move forward. Because hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. Now that's Desmond Tutu. And since the year of Consecrated Life in 2015, religious institutes throughout the world have been following the pathway of renewal. And this is very much in keeping with the call of Vatican II, but was not just a moment in history. It was a moment that would define our history and our future together. Pope Francis has been quoted many times as saying, this is not just a change of era, it's an era of change. And in the context of Vatican II, we will find the discernment criteria for our current reality because Vatican II invited us to follow its light. The charisms of religious institutes is a gift of God to the church. And at this time, we are being called to protect that gift by engaging in the processes of discernment and accompaniment, discernment together and accompaniment of each other as we move forward. Excuse me. I can tell you that, and some of you may have heard Father Frank say this before. Well, Father Frank was talking about the revisions to the Code of Canon Law. There are a couple of things he said that I remember very distinctly. One was that much of the code was written on the back of cocktail napkins. Now, that sounds rather strange, but Father Frank's job was to meet with the cardinals of the various dicasteries, the prefects, and to talk to them about how the law would be able to support, in a way that was not so confined and rigid, a new model of church that the documents of Vatican II had established. And so the idea of writing on the back of the cocktail napkin wasn't that everything was focused on a glass of scotch, but rather it was focused on relationships. I met my own bishop a couple of weeks ago about my own congregation's journey of transformation because I wanted him to be part of this story. I wanted him to know what we were doing. He already knew that we were developing the Ontario Pontifical Religious Institute Steering Committee, moving together, and I wanted him to have an avenue and opportunity to hear from us what we were doing as we move forward, because our ministry and our life is part of the church. Now, I have to tell you, I did meet with the Ontario bishops to be comparable to your local hierarchical model for bishops in Australia. We have the CCCB, the Canadian Conference of Bishops, and then each province. The West has their own, Ontario has their own, Quebec has their own, and Eastern Canada has their own smaller conference of bishops. When I met with the Ontario bishops to tell them about the reality of consecrated life, and the declining numbers, etc., and what we were doing to plan for the future as we move forward. I have to say, I left the meeting with a sense that consecrated life seemed to be a distant memory in the eyes of the bishops, in the eyes of the church, a distant memory that was soon to fade out. Now, do I think they intended to share that sense with me? I don't think so. But that was the sense I've got because all of us, as far as I know, all of our congregations usually began at an invitation of a bishop to continue the mission of the church in our local parishes and our local churches in new ways and to ensure the needs of God people would be addressed. When we sat there, it seemed clear to me that they had no idea what was going on in consecrated life. Now, I'm confident in Australia, you have a much more astute hierarchical perspective on this, and I applaud you if that's the case. But it said to me that I had a lot of work to do to be able to align and realign and invite the conversation with the bishops as we would move forward in this renewal, not only of consecrated life, this renewal of the sense of consecration for the whole church, for all of the baptized. And you will recognize the language I'm suggesting is very much the language of the Synod on synodality. The Holy Father, as you know, has said that he would not complete an apostolic exhortation on the Synod document, that it stood on its own. It needed no apostolic exhortation, and he supported every aspect of it, the most significant of which, for me, were the two chapters that I presented for UISG. One was the call to relationship, and the second was how do we create structures that support the relationship. So we did meet with some of the dicastery staff when we were there, particularly some of the canon lawyers. And there was a Father Nava who was there, who was a canonist, and he focused on discernment and accompaniment. And again, remember as I say this, do I believe with all of my soul that's where they'd like to be? Yes. And do I know that human nature is such that looking at discernment and accompaniment to a place that is foreign, it's like saying, I think I'd like to walk for 40 years in a desert with you. How about that? So I could hear from the canonists sitting at the table their concerns, but I also heard their desire to ensure that there was a connection with consecrated persons and the local church and Dickelcell. And while Father Nava did not elaborate on what monitoring by the local church and Dickelcell would mean, it would be important for us to realize that it's our responsibility to allay the fears of the hierarchy that religious institutes are failing to engage in planning. Our goal is to ensure and reassure that there's appropriate communication as we move forward together, focusing on sustainability and synodality. When we were there, it was Father Nava who brought up Father Morrissey's name, particularly for Canadian religious stewardship, because the Canadians, I sat at the table with Alain Ambeau, and Alain, Father Ambeau is very francophone, and I think in the translation, sometimes the language was such. At one point, I put my hand on his leg because he kept saying to the dicastery staff who sat around the table, we insist on the participation of the laity. We insist on the collaboration with other congregations, because in French, insister could be translated on insist. And I thought, and normally not going to use that kind of language with dicastery. But for the whole model or re-identification of consecrated life under ministry and ministerial public juridic persons, he brought up the issue of Canadian religious stewardship, which Father Frank founded. He founded for congregations who would be coming to the end of their capacity to provide leadership from within for the congregation and continuation of the charism. And he founded this group that has a combination of consecrated persons and laity who are a public juridic person. And Father Nava said this was one of the more creative recommendations that had come to the Holy See. And as Frank said to me, he said, you know, Bonnie, getting civil recommendations or civil acknowledgement of CRS, Canadian Religious Stewardship, was easy. Getting through the Vatican took 8 years to get them to agree. Father Nava's response to that was, you know, it was new. We need more time to discern. So that said to me, not to be discouraged by what I sometimes see as resistance to any recommendations of changes. The resistance is because of fear. And my job then is to say, how do I address your fear clearly and help you to feel secure that we will do this together and we will continue to have you as partners, not adversaries. So focusing on sustainability and synodality as we move forward. Father Nava also invited the conference participants to be aware and to resist this temptation to become self-referential. For example, focusing our attention only on the concerns and needs of our own religious congregation. And that's exactly what you're doing in the Emerging Futures Collaborative. You're focusing together and working together. He said, we may be tempted to shy away from ecclesiastical dialogue. That's sometimes true, but it will take the involvement of every part of the church to help discern the future of consecrated life. Because we're being invited to continue our journey as consecrated persons in new ways. This is new for us. It's new for the church. We've had a 300-year plus history of a particular model of consecrated life. No congregation, as the dicastery emphasized, owns the charism. Each congregation lives their charism in their context. And charisms are entrusted to the religious institutes, as we noted in Canon 582 and 584. We share the charism, and to do so requires ecclesiastical support. Again, in the first, in the December meeting with the dicastery, the whole issue of creative models of collaboration was the focus. In the second meeting, it was to ensure there was communication amongst all of the church. And the dicastery emphasized again and again the need to liaise with the Episcopal conferences. I say that to many of the congregations I'm working with. I say, you know, we have to go and visit your bishop. Your bishop has to be part of this. Your bishop has to know what's happening and feel secure. So this includes the requirements to liaise with the local church, your local bishop, and to ensure that they are aware of your discernment processes. As I mentioned to you, I met with the CCCB and explained the journey that religious institutes are on, so they are aware. But they too are standing on the side thinking, what in heaven's name do we do in this situation? And perhaps religious institutes are being invited to take stock and to recognize perhaps the temporary nature of religious institutes and a new way of walking together. And as we listened to Dickel staff, they echoed in many different ways the invitation to religious institutes to find ways of serving in our church and in our world into the future, because God's invitation to the future will require a new way of walking together and include the religious institutes, the Episcopal conferences, and the Holy See. And Dickel, they noted, has a responsibility to link religious institutes to assist in the accompaniment into the future and to look at collaboration with the laity. Now, I'm involved in research through the Australian Catholic University with Laurie Hallinan, and we are looking at synodality and ministerial PJPs, an appropriate delegation of authority and responsibility to ministerial PJPs. It's still a big stretch. Yes, do I feel that there is a desire for movement? Absolutely. Do I sense there is a fear of moving forward because of a fear of loss of control? Absolutely. In relation to collaboration with the laity, I think what I have experienced is concern from the hierarchy that collaboration with the laity has a long tradition for us. I don't believe that there are any congregations that just began on their own and did their own thing. All of us would have had invitations from local communities, invitations from the hierarchy, and collaboration with the laity to move forward into new ways of being in ministry. After Vatican II, the integration of religious institutes into the broader communities was the norm versus the exception. So it's important to continue to form relationships with the laity that are based on reciprocity and collaboration. Now, when this happened at the Holy See in March of 23, we did not have the final document on the synod and synodality, but it very much links into the synod and synodality, that we have forms of collaboration already in existence and opportunities to share apostolates, to share communion. Pardon me. But collaboration with the laity is always done in context. And Dickelcell noted the critical situation in which religious institutes are living and how relationships with the laity fit into the broader church's mission. Now, again, think in terms of the synod on synodality. What they did say to us, which I thought was very important, they said, it's important that we not use the laity because we have needs. Now, although I indicated that the Holy See had expressed concerns in relation to delegation of authority and responsibility, there was and there is a situation in the Netherlands in which 5 diocesan congregations now have lay boards who are coordinating resources and support for religious institutes not able to elect a leadership team. The reason they got this permission was that those 5 groups are diocesan congregations with a close relationship with the bishops, and the bishops have some degree of control over the assets. And in conversation, this was the great part about being at the Holy See with these various congregations from around the world. Some of the sisters from the Netherlands said, and they said it very clearly, I'm not repeating any tales out of school, when at one point the Archbishop Carballo stood up and he said, you know, we were thinking it might be a good idea if we transferred the pontifical religious institutes to the diocesan bishops. And you've heard me say this before, I'm sure. It was like a collective intake of air in the room. And if you've ever been to Costco or one of the large stores that sells those vacuum containers for food preservation, that's what it was like in the room. There was this collective intake of air. And God bless her, one of the Netherlands sisters stood up and she said, you know, Your Excellency, I know you think that there are collaborative relationships between the congregations and the diocesan bishops. But for some of us, we feel they may be waiting in abeyance until they have access to the assets of our congregations. So that offered a tempering moment of this enthusiasm to transfer pontifical institutes to diocesan bishops, and it seemed to go no further. However, just keep that in the back of your mind about how we move forward and how to be, as scripture says, as cunning as a fox and as gentle as a lamb. We need to recognize that our works and apostolates must survive beyond the influence of the religious institutes that may have founded their ministries. And so finding new models of continuing the ministry beyond the congregations is essential. And that the charism is expressed in works, but the work is not equal to the charism. The work can change, the charism remains constant. And so also defining the difference between laity and religious institutes can create walls. And this stands in contrast to the gifts recognized in the sharing of diversity of gifts, both lay and religious, which can create wells of enrichment. And Sister Carmen spoke to the group to the importance of collaboration with the local church. Again, what's the recurring theme you hear? In December, was collaboration between religious institutes. In March, it was certainly collaboration with the local church. I said to Father Alain when we were on the plane, I said, it kind of seemed to me that somehow some bishops got wind of this and said the religious are doing all kinds of strange things and we need to regain some control. So again, it's not to suggest that this was indeed the fact, but there is an uncertainty. And so how do you address an uncertainty? By number one, providing information, establishing relationships, and ensuring that the hierarchy of the church has a sense of comfort that consecrated life is moving forward in a way that will benefit not only the religious institutes, but most certainly the mission and ministry of the church, which extends beyond any one of our congregations. Excuse me. And Sister Carmen noted that while diocesan bishops are required to respect the local autonomy of religious institutes live and work within the framework of the local church. Again, I'm reading between the lines here, and you have to know the politics that goes on in the background and the concerns that are being raised, if not directly, then indirectly, through some of the language that was used at these presentations. She invited the participants at that March meeting to promote communion with the local churches in which they exist. Absolutely essential. And she suggested a team approach to collaborate between religious institutes, bishops, and the laity. And I think you have that kind of a structure already in your emerging futures. And to build on that and to ensure there's this continuation of a sense of collaboration, of unity of purpose, etc. And while the dicastery expressed significant caution regarding congregational wills, and I noted that in your documents, they did recognize the importance of ensuring assets are appropriately allocated to continue the mission of the church. And there were some suggestions for the collaborative team to design strategies to address the allocation of assets would be identified and included some of the groups that we have in Canada, the Quebec Compassion Network, working collaboratively with the local bishops, attempting to develop a one church approach that includes a team of planners, including laity, religious, and bishop. And although not mentioned specifically at this meeting, it was mentioned at the March meeting, CRS was hailed as Father Frank's group, Canadian Religious Stewardship, was hailed as a visionary model to support religious institutes into the future. And so they supported that again. And she emphasized the importance of building trust with the local bishops. I don't know how many ways I could say this to you. Building trust with the local bishops. And since the December 22 meeting, there seems to be a growing concern that religious institutes that are pontifical might bypass local bishops in their planning processes, and they need not to be bypassed. We need to find the ways of connecting in a meaningful way, not just to submit reports, give activity updates, etc. One meeting participant noted her concern that the local churches sometimes want to take over, as I mentioned, property and assets of religious institutes. So establishing this good working relationship can help to address this issue, and relationships take time to establish and build. As I mentioned, our conference, and I know that your conference as well, meets with your National Bishops' Conference at their annual meetings, because bishops are responsible for the life of faith in their diocese, which includes support for religious institutes serving in their diocese. It's pretty hard to be supportive of religious institutes if they have been seen as independent, autonomous agents who support the mission through their charism. So to find ways of more overtly connecting our bishops with our institutes is really very critical. And of course, it goes without saying that our conferences are there to support the church in whatever way we can. So in your talk context, what did you tell me in your documentation? Excuse me. I very much appreciated your background paper from January of 2023, where you talked about Catholic Religious Australia, uh, your initial infrastructure discussions, the transition committee and the transition management team, and then the development of the emerging futures group, your CRA submission in 2019 to Dickel-Cell, and the response of Dickel-Cell, which probably is the most important letter you will have received, because in there, I think they identified, they were saying no, but what was the reason they said no? So I think to find ways of going back so that you can continue to build this relationship. You found a way civilly. My question to you would be, how do you find a way canonically to ensure that these relationships continue and built on a solid foundation? I loved some of your language in your document. The emerging vision is for a kingdom, that there would be communion for mission, courageous of heart on mission, and a common purpose for the common good, and the significance of interrelationships, a new picture of religious life, where new possibilities can emerge and new governance and support groups can be identified. You've identified your purpose well. It's transition support and looking at ongoing governance. And again, I'm not repeating your document because you know it far better than I, but to provide administrative support. Canonical congregational governance. This is something that's quite critical. And looking at what the church has agreed to up to this point and where we might be called to into the future might be something that requires a bit more conversation. And to protect the civil and the canonical rights of the members of our congregation, to form a collaborative ownership and governance of EFCL, and to create tailored agreements and be accountable to religious institutes. And you also mentioned the concept of congregational wills that may not have been warmly embraced, but the concept of what you do with a congregational will arose by any other name is still arose. The importance is to ensure that the assets are available for the sake of the mission. You talked about canonical governance structures, but particularly a canonical delegate and two consultors. Now, you indicated that hierarchical authorization for both of these positions will be required. My experience is we had hierarchical approval for the appointment of the canonical delegate, but the consultors at the local level, we call them advisors at the Sisters of Providence in Kingston, that would be something that would be done internally to the house without the requirement of approval from a hierarchical authority. Now, again, when I was working with the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul in Kingston for their chapter, it took us 2.5 years to come to the place where the congregation could say, we will not be able to elect a leadership team. So then what did that mean? And so they were able to write to the Holy See, explaining the journey and the process that led them to this decision and what they would need. I was appointed the canonical apostolic, excuse me, apostolic commissary for this group. And when I picked up the decree in February of this 24, when I picked that up at the Holy See, the canonist who was working on the case, he said, you know, Bonnie, it is not normal or has not been our practice to assign an apostolic commissary from a different religious tradition. So you have the Sisters of St. Joseph and the Sisters of Providence with a Vincentian charism and spirituality. He said, it's not normal that we would do this. And he said, the reality is we will run out of people. We have to think broader than the individual congregations and charisms to the concept of the call of consecrated life, which is beyond our founders and foundresses. So to move on. And you created service streams for community coordination, archives, business management, health, well-being and coordination, and professional standards. Really a great model. what you have presented here is, for me, very reflective of what is occurring in Canadian religious stewardship in Canada. And so that leads me to the question, is there some way for Canadian religious stewardship to collaborate with Emerging Futures Collaborative? The issue of travel, the issue of distance, the issue of space between us becomes a moot point given our capacity to interrelate and to share the progress and the ideas moving forward. The most wonderful thing the Holy See suggested, and we know it to be true ourselves, is the place of collaboration. It's like allowing God's Spirit to fan into a flame the longings of God's heart for consecrated life that comes not just from one group, but from multiple sources who can expand that excitement and enthusiasm to continue for consecrated people into the future. Again, the whole issue of the Holy See's perspective of how much experimentation is acceptable. And so I have seen situations in which the recommendation that came from the Holy See for the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul was to have someone from outside of their spiritual tradition appointed as commissary. The interesting thing is that I was appointed as commissary, and my successors as General Superior of my congregation would continue as commissary. And I had the capacity to delegate commissary responsibilities to a group, either to an individual or to groups of people who would be able to help the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul ensure that their needs as a religious institute were met. That was a big, big change in the Holy See. What I loved about it is we wouldn't have to go back to the Holy See if I were to drop dead. The next person who would follow me in the seat as General Superior would continue as commissary. Will we tell the Vatican that I had dropped dead? Well, hopefully. But some of them might be saying, oh, thank God. We had a hard time controlling her on a good day. But, excuse me, looking at this, it's an issue of relationship building. I was talking to John Ritz here in Canada, who is the president of the Catholic, let me just get this title right. They changed their title recently. The Catholic Health Association of Canada. And those are multiple PJPs from across the country. And we were talking about the process of relationship building. And I want the Holy See to, number one, know who I am, know what I look like. I want to invite them out to dinner. And as I said to one of the congregations I'm working with, I said, you know, you can get a whole lot more done over a glass of wine than you can over a board table. So to have that place of relationship building, and I was talking to another group and they said, it makes me think that I should go to the Holy See regularly to sit on their doorstep and to talk to them. Well, maybe going to their doorstep with others with whom we are collaborating is the way to move forward. I know that Emerging Futures has been to the Holy See, and you know Sister Rosemary Reese, a friend of mine, with this whole change in governance at the Holy See with Sister Simona. I just sent her an email, told her when I was going to be at UISG, and with the collaborative ministerial PJP group with Australia Catholic University. And I asked her, could I take you out for dinner? Could I, and if not, could I get you breakfast or lunch or whatever you need? And there is nothing I need or want from you. I just really want to connect with you. That's all. I'm not coming to ask for anything. I'm just coming so that you can put a face with a name that says, this woman will keep us apprised. And even better yet, if you can find a bishop who'll go with you, that goes a long way as well. They usually are pretty good at wanting to go out for something that would be helpful. So what makes things, this time in consecrated life, more exciting for me is the whole issue of collaboration. In my own experience, about 2021, I began calling together the general superiors and the assistant general superiors of the 6 pontifical congregations in Ontario and said, we're all in the same situation here. We're all declining numbers. What could we do better together than we could do independently? So we're looking at a collaborative model to be able to support what we know will be the next step for us, which will be appointment of commissaries. And so I worked with another congregation who applied for a commissary, and they have applied to use the model that we used in Kingston. Now, would they have known about this model if we had not been working together? Probably not. But are we able to reference what's already been approved by the Vatican so that it is not a big leap to say, well, maybe we should try this again? It's not a big leap to say, when you put in the model, make sure you have an evaluation process and you keep them apprised of the evaluation. The other thing that is very exciting to me is the sense of newness of consecrated life and the focus in synodality on relationships and structures. Pardon me, I'm still living with the remnants of this virus. When we look at synodality and the call to relationships and structures to support those relationships, I think often of the words of Scripture, by your own words you are condemned. So to be able to take the words out of the document, the final document of the Synod and Synodality, one of the best things that I could have done, although it was a painful experience, was to create the presentation for chapters 2 and 3 of that document, which was on relationships and structures. That was one of the best things I could have done because it reignited my sense of what are the connections here of moving forward. What can we build upon that has already been articulated as a gift to the church, the synod and synodality? I said in my presentation, and I will say again, one of my biggest fears about the synod on synodality final document is that it may rest on a bookshelf and acquire dust. It will require a movement of God's Spirit and initiators. Do I think it's going to come from our diocesan bishops? That would be my hope, but I think we need not wait for them. I think we have the gift of consecrated life is we already have a lived experience of synodality. We know what works, and we also know what's challenging when we try to get it to work in relation to relationships and structures. We know about chapters, we know about accountability, and how can we help our local churches do this? I'm quite confident that the bishops around the world are looking at this and saying, how the heck do we do this? This is impossible. Can we begin from our little corners of the world to say, this is how we can invite in our bishops, and if they don't come, then ensure that they have the information regularly in a way that is non-offensive, that provides them alternatives, and ensures that they continue to be the authors of the destiny of the church, which is the responsibility of all of us. And they may not know how to share that responsibility. So that's what continues to make this whole process exciting for me. The collaboration that we're being called to across nations. As I said when we were at Rome, I said, I think the dicastery would examine a proposal from the Ontario Pontifical Religious Institutes in a different way. If we came with our proposal, Emerging Futures came with theirs, and we had done something together to create a joint proposal. And have Ireland there. Look at the CRS model that they already said, Canadian Religious Stewardship. They have publicly articulated that this model was an exciting possibility for consecrated life to support consecrated life into the future. So how would we be able to capture the essence of that and to, in a way, expose to the hierarchy that this is something that you've already identified as not only good in Canada, but the potential is good for more than just Canada. so that when you come not as a single congregation or not as a single country. You come as a collaborative group that have identified new ways of moving forward as consecrated persons. The one place that I would say this gets a little bit tricky, excuse me, is in the United States, because they have 4 groups of consecrated persons that were in Rome. One is certainly LCWR, Leadership Conference of Women Religious. The second is the leaders from Women Religious. About 20% of the congregations in the United States belong to that group. They're usually a bit more conservative, habited, etc. The third group was the congregation for men and men's congregations. And it was very surprising. I see we've got some men joining us tonight. I was very surprised that at the table, when they were talking about their realities, they felt that their primary role was to ensure safeguarding, and they would go to a third world country to get any leadership needs for their congregations fulfilled into the future. That was a big surprise to me. But that seemed to be their stance from this particular group. Again, not a large group, but this particular group. I think we have much more potential from consecrated persons generally, working collaboratively for this newness of relationships and providing the structures to do that. So what might collaboration look like? Well, I've identified a few. I think that we have the option to expand our venues, expand our vision to be embraced by a largesse of soul, a largesse of spirit, a largesse of vision that capitalizes on experience, but is not limited by experience. So that the collaboration that I'm suggesting we might consider would look like think tanks, that would look like evolutionary discernment to a new way of being. As I began this tonight, I said, in all of creation, nothing in creation ever dies. It always evolves to a new model, a new way of being in relationship, of being connected. I've been around religious life long enough to know and recall the days of competition, not collaboration, in which the number of schools you had, the number of hospitals you had, the number of novices you had would be a source of great pride and a source of judgment as well. So in all of this, you look beyond that and you say, what's the newness that we're being called to today? And a couple of questions that I ask myself. So what is it that I hope? And how am I hope? As I said, a couple of days this past few weeks, I really wanted to just put my head in a pail of sand. So it comes and goes. I'm not always wearing rose-colored glasses, but in my soul, I believe this is a monumental opportunity for the church and for consecrated life to find new ways of being in relationship, of collaboration, and discerning a future that is full of hope, because God's Spirit will never let us move to a place of death. Death is different. When congregations come to completion as they are, this is good because it opens up the space for newness to be born. So I've talked way too long. And so what I'm going to do is open this up, stop sharing, so that we can have some dialogue. And you can certainly tell me if you don't agree with what I've said, or you think that I really am wearing rose-colored glasses, that none of this is ever going to happen, about your experience and how you think we might be able to expand the place of collaboration beyond Canada, beyond Australia, beyond, to places that will help the Holy See recognize good planning, good preparation, but most importantly, God's Spirit to invite us to walk synodally into the creation and recreation of a new church, a new way of being in relationship for the sake of the mission. Amen. So, I hope I didn't bore you.
I can hear a lot of deep breaths around the Zoom as I turn my microphone on, Bonnie, as that intake of air is around those questions, particularly about what do I hope for and am I hope? So between Sharon and I, we will try and get back to the full screen. And if people use the reaction to raise their hand, that might be the easiest way to identify. And then they can unmute to invite their questions. Helen Kelly, would you unmute and we can listen to you, please?
It's a comment. It's just that there was a lot of hope in what you said, and I like the idea of that God doesn't ever, God's creation doesn't ever fail to exist. It just changes, it transforms. And thank you very much for the enthusiasm that you've allowed us to have. Really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Anne-Lane.
Just two comments from me, Bonnie. Well, first of all, thanks very much. I found that very inspiring, and the members of the EFCL board are all here this morning, and we'll be continuing our conversation around this later. Just to let you know and to let everybody else know that Margaret Jones, Sister of Mercy from Parramatta, is leading a small group to meet with the dicastery, not going to ask for anything, but just to try and broaden their awareness of what is happening among religious in Australia. That's the first one. The second one is that we have been in close contact with CRA over the last few months, and that they are going, the executive of CRA have a meeting with the dicastery this month, during March, and the executives of CRA and the executive of EFCL are meeting together after that to build up a covenant. But one of their tasks is to actually say to the dicastery, well, like, we're working together, what else are you asking for? And we have, EFCL has also been in touch with the Bishops' Conference, and this afternoon actually have a meeting with the General Secretary of the Bishops' Conference to work with him, who's very keen to work with us to see how we can both educate the bishops and, as he said, know what you're asking them for. So one of the things that we're going this afternoon to ask them for is a clear letter from the Bishops' Conference in support of the work of Emerging Futures, and to alert them further, since our last visit with them, with the bishops, we have many new bishops, and to be alert to what we can offer congregations that they have concern for in their diocese. I said three, but I'm going to do a fourth one. I love that idea of collaborating with Canada and Ireland, and it's something that we have talked about as a board, and I think your words will encourage us to really take the steps forward to do that. So thanks. Bonnie, just to say, I chair the board of Emerging Futures. Everybody else on the screen will be aware of that, just so. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and congratulations on the work you're doing, both with CRA and your efforts to connect with the dicastery. Those kinds of what seem to be small steps are really critical for the future, because, as Frank would say, it's not like turning the Queen Mary on a dime. It's about relationship building so that they have a sense of security in your action plan, that they're not being left out in the cold. And I would say that there are situations in which that is indeed the case. They have been left out in the cold, that there hasn't been collaboration, there hasn't been information sharing, just a fait accompli at the end. When the final document is completed, here it is, and asking for sign off. And that will not establish relationships of collaboration. That really makes the dicastery very, very concerned. So you're doing a wonderful job to do that. Congratulations.
we have two screens of people here. So if we're not looking at the one you're in when you put your hand up, just unmute yourself and speak.
Gabriel MacLellan.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Bonnie, I'm on the project with you in Rome later in the year, in April, on PJPs as a model of synodality. And that project is funded by the Porticus Foundation. And
Yes.
I'm just thinking, given that I think they're funding 80 projects or something to do with synodality, is there another project that could be put to them about journeying together, EFCL and the Canadian, the Irish, whatever groups, another model of a synodal church? So it's just a question, but it might be worth following up perhaps when we're in Rome.
That's a very good idea. Sources of funding are really important, but you have to clearly understand how projects get approved, what the criteria are, and to build your project based on their criteria, and then go from there. So, having a model that already involves participation of multiple groups might be the competitive edge for getting approval for some things. A lot of it, as I look at it, is to me developing a research-based practice model. What you're doing to ensure that there is documentation, reflection, discernment, evaluation, modification, because the attempt is not to create a static model that can be superimposed on an existing structure that seems to be diminishing. I believe the invitation is to create an organic model that has flexibility and the potential to respond to various contexts in new ways while sharing fundamental values that could help all of us move forward. To me, this is an ideal research project for somebody other than me.
And Bonnie, if I could just say, we are doing that all the time. In fact, when we started working with our religious institutes in 2020, we started out with just 3 congregations, and it was fairly tentative because we were just starting out, and it was also in COVID. But as we've gone along, I mean, we see ourselves as evolving and emerging as well, that we've really built over these 5 years that we've been working with congregations, the way that we work with them, the principles that are underlying our working with them, and the way they're learning from each other and picking up each other's models and, using each other's work to help their own work along. So, while I definitely wouldn't call it a research-based model, we're really learning as we go, and we're maximizing that learning. Peter, who is our change management consultant, is really assisting the rest of the transition team to always be doing that learning and always be sort of working out where we can leverage. And Gabriel MacLellan, who didn't actually introduce herself in an EFCL context, she is one of the member representatives of the 8 companies that own EFCL. And she's been involved in the growth and the development of EFCL almost right from the very beginning, haven't you, Gabriel? And just a couple of years ago, we talked about writing a kind of a paper, doing some research and writing a paper about the actual development of EFCL. And Gabriel has actually started to do that work. She's very enthusiastic about it. And she decided that over these past Christmas holidays, she would start that work. So it's, we are cognizant of some of the things you're talking about, but I certainly wouldn't want to claim this is a research-based project. It's really what we're doing as we're going along, and sort of learning by doing, and sort of reflecting on what we've done, sharing between the groups. And that's been a really important part of EFCL, that the groups are actually helping each other to move forward.
Has EFCL considered PJP status?
Anne, do you want to answer that?
We did, Bonnie, at the beginning. I was actually asked that question recently. Look, we decided at the time no, because each of the congregations in their own right have PJP status. So whether we need to reconsider or not, I don't know. But it seemed it wasn't the thinking of the group what we call the transition group, who before we formally formed as a company, that there was a need to do so. Whether we need to revisit, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, thanks.
I was going to say one of the difficulties with establishing any PJP is the Holy See is not quite clear who should be responsible for this. And so it might take a very long time to find the right home, quote unquote, for status as PJP. I know that there's been a request for PJP status gone into the Holy See from another group in relation to healthcare, but you're right. Each of the congregations by law is a PJP. The one thing that you're able to do with official PJP status is the whole issue of temporal goods for alienation and procurement, etc., of goods for the sake of the mission. So I raise it as something that, I don't know, there might be an existing structure that would allow Emerging Futures to liaise with an existing PJP, excuse me.
Bonnie, sorry. Perhaps
yeah, go ahead.
to come in the ownership of temporal goods. That's one of the questions I have met with Mary Claire, who's here on the screen, and our previous interim management a couple of times with the dicastery. I think one of the things that impresses them about us is we do not, as an organisation, own any temporal goods. All of those goods stay the property and belonging to the congregations. So that's I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that was another reason why we decided that we did not want to go JP status. Keep the authority within the individual congregations. And I think the other thing we learned, particularly since our last visit, that it's best if we stay in the background and let individual congregations, like we help support them in their work. Now, that's just the thinking of the board, and I'd say of the EFCL team at this point, whether there comes a time to change. Now, Gabriel might have some thoughts about that, because she was part of that decision-making at that stage and her involvement with another PJP.
I think, as Anne's put it, is probably my memory as well. It might be worth commenting on a parallel issue, and I think that is, Bonnie, we have here the Association of Ministerial Public Juridic Persons, so it's the only umbrella body in any country for the MPJPs. And again, when that was being set up, we did think about canonical status, but it was decided it would take too long to do it. And there was an urgent need to start working together and collaborating. And I think that is likely to change in the future as well, because that body is probably going to need canonical status going down the track with for the sort of reasons we're talking about this morning, and who's going to appoint the trustees into the future, maybe when the founding congregation has gone to fulfillment.
Yes, good rationale. Just wondered. That was my question to you. Finding ways of collaboration, I mean, it does take time. And as I went through the final document on the synod and synodality, I could understand bishops and the church saying, how the heck are we going to do this? It's going to be so complex. It's going to be so time consuming to walk together and to engage all the people of God in this process. That's why I think that we probably have a little bit of a competitive edge as consecrated persons to be able to initiate in small ways this walking together, which you're already doing, as I understand your structure with EFCL. Excuse me. So even that provides a bit of if not an impetus, then at least it provides an opportunity for a sense with the diocesan bishops that you can help them be successful with the final document on the synod and synodality by engaging the laity and the parishes and the parish priests, etc., helping them move forward in a way that we have experience in.
Thanks, Bonnie. Sandra.
I've just come back last night from our annual meeting of congregational leaders, and as part of that meeting, half of the time, 1.5 days, is spent working together with the whole group of bishops. We have a number of relatively newly appointed bishops who are, I would use the word, floundering. And the bishop of the largest diocese said openly that nothing that happened at this meeting was of any use or relevance to him in his work in his diocese. So I think we've got a long way to go. Our local bishop did ask me if I would speak to the group about what we're doing in our moving to completion, which I did. But I would say that most of the men in black shirts were glazed over, shall we say. So, I mean, that's where we're starting. But what I like about what you're saying, Bonnie, is it's a challenge and an invitation to try to build forward on that. I have a distinct impression that the bishops would be very interested in young religious inhabits who will work in the diocese for stipends, but they're not interested in older religious women or men who are living lives of prayer and community and hope in the way that we do. So that's all I just wanted to say.
That's a very common experience, Sandra, but I'm very glad you made the overture. And whether or not there is recognition of the value of consecrated life from the bishop's perspective, maybe that's our challenge, to make that a real experience for them, which only comes through relationships. Now, you won't be successful with everyone either.
Mark Hinchy.
Unmute. Thank you, Bonnie, for your wonderful input. I'm one of those who has just viewed the conclave, which won the big prize.
Oh, yes, yes.
And listening to you, and particularly when Sharon spoke about, I'm just part of a congregation that is part of the EFCL movement and has been for quite a number of years. And we've been very involved in all that discernment and discussion and collaboration and so on. That's very, very tiring and yet so wonderful in other ways for newness. And it seems to me that you might comment a bit on, from what Sandra said just before too, that since the Vatican Council and told us as religious women and men how we were to update aggiornamento and all of that, we've done nothing else but discuss, tribute, decide, discuss, come together, discuss. It's a process that has gone on for years. And it seems to me that we now have a kind of a organisational difficulty with the Vatican or with the bishops, that they have not been through that process of constant discussion, coming to decisions together, collaborating, working it all out, failing, coming back again, all of that. So there's a quite distinct process for EFCL, it seems to me, that recognises the newness of all of this and the difficulties associated with newness, where you make the path by walking it. And it's difficult, it's hard, we're never quite sure what the outcomes will be. And yet it seems to be of the spirit to do this, because we don't see any other way we can pass on the missions that we've all been involved in over the years. And therefore, do you have any comment on, to see the difference that there is in our mentality even to what is necessary at the moment as a church, between the religious institutes who are doing this And it seems to me that much of the Episcopal body that doesn't do this kind of discerning discussion, working together collaboratively as equals even in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just wanted to throw that as someone who's not in the team of the EFCL, but has been part of the process with them in our local congregation. And we have a bishop who is on side, but I'm not sure we would say he's been really involved in the whole process. He's got so many things to do, I guess, but
Yeah.
we do engage with him. So I'll leave that with you as any discussion, any comment you can give us on this whole
Well,
difficulty of relationships.
well, thank you, Margaret. I think you've identified one of the key areas that requires ongoing focus, prayer, and discernment. And it's quite true that the documents of Vatican II got lived out through religious institutes, through consecrated persons, not so much through the church as a whole. But I recall as well that it usually, for a large international organization, it'll take about 60 years before the initial suggestions of any kind of a change model can begin to be implemented. So that kind of gives me a bit of solace that I guess we're right on target here. Number one, we've got about 60 years of history. But when I was at the Vatican before as a student, you know, they always take the canon law students to the Vatican and you go to all the dicasteries. And we were there for the Congregation for Clergy. And the secretary who was there talking to us, he was originally from Ireland, but returning to the United States, leaving his ministry as secretary of the dicastery. And he said, you know, I'm going to be leaving, so I get to tell you my perspective on how things really are. He said, our biggest problem is, I think, from a clergy perspective, is we're all lone rangers. We don't have an experience of community. We don't have an experience of mutual support and collaboration. It was an interesting dynamic for me. I had not been part of the hierarchical church. I worked in hospital administration for most of my apostolic life. And it was a surprise to me when I went to study canon law. And I knew there were people studying canon law so they could have a foot up as a possible bishop, you know, movement in the hierarchy of the church. So I suppose in many ways we have a church and a structure and human beings that struggle, that are called to be the best we can be and often fail. And so how to establish relationships with our bishops that are beyond the boardroom table, that are truly relationships of support, recognizing the struggles they're having. You've identified that, Margaret, in your words when you said it's very difficult for them. They feel like they are basically holding the mission of the church in a structure that is devolving, in a church that post-COVID is not returning to previous status. And what is the grace in this of what we're being called to be and how we are called to be together from this place of synodality? I think the Pope has a very clear picture of this in this group of cardinals he's working with. Getting that drilled down to the local level and to the parishes, that's very difficult. Do I think that many of the bishops would prefer to have more traditional religious with habits? Yep, I do. And I don't want them to forget that the mission of the church was really built by all of the faces I see on this screen today, that it really, it was in collaboration with the bishops, but it was the religious women and men who were able to move the mission of the church forward based on the needs of the people. So going back to that fundamental way of being in relationship at the grassroots with what the needs of the church are and pulling in the laity for collaboration for the sake of the mission. My hope is that this will take off some of the pressure from the bishops. I had one bishop say to me when I was presenting the Ontario Pontifical Religious Institute Steering Committee, he said, well, when are you going to allow diocesan congregations to be part of this group? He said, because I have like 13 diocesan congregations. On the tip of my tongue that thankfully I was able to hold was, and who might have approved those 13 diocesan congregations? It was the diocesan bishop who could see short-term, but not longer-term, the implications of this and what they might need. Yes, it sounds good in theory. That's why the Holy See changed the model. You used to be able to, a bishop could begin a congregation but couldn't shut it down. You'd need a apostolic see approval for that. But now you need approval for the new diocesan institute to be created. Exactly for that reason, because our vision can be too small. And our church is structured in a way that largesse of heart and largesse of spirit sometimes is more difficult to harness or to embrace than little hierarchical models of control. So I look at it and I say, I've got to believe that it's God's church and God's spirit, because we can't do it. I can't do it. But what I do believe is that God's spirit can. I may not see it in my lifetime. I'll be looking down from heaven, I hope. Somebody said, what makes you think you're going to heaven? I said, I'm counting on it. So when I see and I read your documents, I think you're doing some really wonderful things. And as I said to you, when I read the CRA proposal that went in 2019, I thought it was a good proposal. Now, I thought it may have been better if you could have had some back and forth with modifications in the document and going back and forth, etc., with Dickel-Cell. Hindsight's always 20/20. So then the question becomes, what are the next steps of engaging the dicastery, of engaging the congregations, of continuing to evaluate the model and how you proceed and continue to respond in creative ways for the sake of the apostolate, for the sake of the charism, for the sake of the mission of the church, and an expanded definition of consecrated life for all the baptized.
Bonnie, each one of us will take from our conversation particular words that strike us. But as you continue to speak about the Holy Spirit, for me, this is an opportunity where we've heard the voice of God and the voice of the Spirit through your words today, but also the firing us to remember that the call is one of life and possibility and collaboration, and that together we can make those pathways across the globe, but also those little steps that we're taking are all part of that, so that that sense of the divine has been realised in our conversation this morning. But we also feel that we've been embraced by our Canadian sister to a whole new sense of consecrated life, which not only the women and men on the screen today, but the fact that Emerging Futures since day one has been a partnership with our laity, who have been instrumental in that conversation and its evolution. And we will continue to involve, but particularly on a personal level. I look forward to reading you in Sydney at the end of March when you breathe fire into my own congregation.
I don't know about the fire part, but hopefully the Holy Spirit will be the flame that ignites the soul.
Well, your flame has certainly ignited us this morning. And just from a practical point of view, Sharon will in the coming week or so enable this recording to be uploaded to our website. And so we also thank you, Bonnie, for the other many women and men who will get an opportunity to listen, and that you will once again be a catalyst for conversation and collaboration as the Spirit breathes life into the new models of consecrated life. So thank you one and all for your participation. Sharon, I must always bow to you to have the last word.
Oh, no, I don't need the last word, Willinda. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Bonnie. And we look forward to future Zooms together and future meetings together throughout the year. Thank you all.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful morning.
Thank you,
Take
Bonnie.
care.
Thanks, Bonnie.